So it's about 7:45 my time here in Missouri. And it's been kind of a tough week for some of those in Mormon fundamentalism with the passing of David Nielsen. I got to tell you, I sat here this evening wondering what to do about the podcast this week. I thought about just posting an episode as normal, but that didn't feel right. I thought about not posting anything at all, and that didn't feel right either. So as I prayed to know what to do, I was given an idea, and that is to re-release David's last episode of the podcast he had done with me, that was on the topic of brotherhood. I was still kind of unsure if that's what I should do, if that was correct. So I reached out to a member of David's family to ask him what he kind of thought about the idea, if it would be proper, because the last thing I wanted to do was to cause any more hurt to anybody in the family or anyone that really held David near to them. After talking with him, he was in agreement that re-releasing this episode would be a good thing. Now, before I roll into this episode, I just want to say a few things about David here. First, David was a friend. He was the first fundamentalist that I didn't know, who reached out and told me that the podcast was worthwhile and really just encouraged me to keep going at it. That it was worthwhile. That it would do some good. And I'm not sure I can fully express how much that was needed at that time. To know that another fundamentalist, apart from some of my immediate friends, thought that this was a worthwhile pursuit meant the world to me and gave me some fuel to keep going. We would later end up working together a little bit with investigators that would make contact with our two different groups, and we would kind of compare notes and talk about where they might fit best and where they might grow the most. And he was just a guy who just wanted to see people be blessed wherever that was going to be. He really always wanted just to bless people where they were at to the most he could. And it's such a rare thing in this world. He would call me or I'd call him, and we would just shoot the breeze and talk about the history of Mormon fundamentalism or doctrinal ideas or just different ideas altogether. And we'd bounce those off of each other, and we'd be on the phone for an hour or so. And gosh, I can't speak for him, but I really enjoyed those conversations that we had. Above all, I saw in David a guy who just tried to live his life by the Spirit. Now, in this podcast, I left in the first 2 minutes. I cut some of myself out because I really wanted to draw attention to David. But there's the 2 minutes at the very beginning that I left in because I tell a story a little bit of how this episode came to be. And David was in tune with the Spirit, and he called me exactly the right moment. And you'll hear about it. You'll see it. And I guess one other thing I'd say is pay special attention to the end here in David's last comments, because I think you get a real good idea of exactly where some of his heart and some of his passion was when it came to the gospel. Now, one last item here, perhaps the most important thing now. With David's passing, he left a lot of family here on the other side, and they're going to need some help. So I ask you now, the audience, if you haven't done so already, please consider donating to the family by clicking on the link below and donating. By doing so, you'll be alleviating so much burden from a family who's already hurting so badly. So with that, here's my conversation with David and some of his thoughts on unity and brotherhood. David, how you doing, man?
Good, good. It's good to see and meet up with you again.
Yeah, dude, I always enjoy our talks. I like you to death. I mean, I just love you. You're a great guy, and I'm always game to have these conversations with you. Before we get going here, we're going to talk tonight about brotherhood and friendship, right? And an interesting thing happened as you called me for this. You called me about this when I was wrapping up my first night in Philadelphia. Um,
Mm.
and I had walked around Philadelphia for probably a good 2 hours downtown around City Hall, Independence Hall, the whole downtown area there. And then you called, and I was already on fire. I'm sure you could tell, right? Like I was
Mhm.
already spitting fire, like, dude, you wouldn't believe what I saw. Holy cow. And then I'm seeing this. And so I apologize for that because I think I like totally word vomited all over the phone at you as I was on there because I was just amped up and excited. But then you said, you know, I would like to come on the podcast and talk about brotherhood. And I was like, no way. Right? Like, no way. It's exactly what I was looking at. Like, no way. And we talked a little bit, and I'm just so grateful for how the Lord works. I mean, He is just so good. And there are certain times where I second guess myself, right? Like, okay, am I just getting amped up just on the history, or am I really picking something up here? And so that kind of call that you made there, man, that just kind of like sealed the deal. So I am really looking forward to this.
That's awesome. Well, that's a great story, and it is true. The Lord blesses us in times when we're not expecting it, but there's something that needs to happen. And I don't know why. I'm not the most prophetic person or anything. I've been thinking about this for a couple of weeks, honestly, just going, because we did a couple other podcasts, and
Mhm.
I really enjoyed doing them, which is kind of strange to say, I guess, but I just like talking the gospel. But I just kept feeling like I feel like we need to go over something that's a little more usable to people today. Like the
Exactly.
law of consecration, some of the other things we went over, it's really good stuff. But if there's something that we can use our personal experience to help better people's lives today, man, I just felt like something simple. And then I start diving into more of this. And I'm like, oh, this is not simple. There's a wealth of information here because really you're talking about the foundation of the gospel,
Mhm.
So yeah, that's great. And I was thinking after you told me you were in Philadelphia, I actually did a little research myself to kind of, because I'm unfamiliar with some of that history. And that's where the name Philadelphia comes from, is from the two
Yes.
Greek words, philo and what, Delphia, Delphus, something like that. And that's uh, brotherly love. That's what
Yep.
those two mean. And the kind of love, because Greek has different words for different love, and not to get too complicated, but it's different than the love that Paul was talking about in First
Mhm.
Corinthians chapter 13. That's agape in the Greek.
Yep.
Philo is like a real intimate kind of brotherly love, specifically, not a romantic love, but a real genuine fondness and caring for another person.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I'm still working on some stuff, and I started cross-referencing some things that Penn had said, and then some things Joseph had said on this very
mm,
subject. And I'll tell you what, like it's I won't say it's verbatim because that's not true, but
yeah,
the message is verbatim, right? I mean, the
right.
the message is very clear. And if you don't mind, there's a couple things from Penn here I want to read real quick if you're good with that, if I don't derail you.
Yeah, sure. No, it's great.
So one thing he said is he said a true friend freely advises, justly assists, readily adventures boldly, takes uh, pa- uh, takes all patiently, defends courageously, and continues a friend unchangeably. Um, and there was another quote here that he gave concerning the Native Americans too, which I found really interesting. So in my studies here, what I discovered is that Penn had one of the longest standing treaties with the Native Americans of any colonial settler. It was him and it
Mm,
was the Puritans in up in Plymouth. Um, but it is absolutely incredible when you start looking at the gospel. And Joseph actually speaks a lot on brotherly love and affection and those things. And there, especially in Joseph's writings, I think what we can draw out is that he yearned for that kind of brotherhood, right? This wasn't something that he was just doing because the Lord told him to do in terms of trying to unite people together. He felt it at his core. That comes through when you start looking up friendship quotes by Joseph Smith.
Yeah, it reminds me of that quote. I remember listening lots of times growing up, but it was what Willard Richards had said that Joseph said about him.
Right.
And this would have been a little later on, maybe in the 40s. And he had entrusted Willard Richards to keep his journals and kind of be a general manager for him, because Joseph wasn't very good at managing his finances and that, but Willard Richards had a talent. And Joseph said something to him. He says, I have, I'm gonna butcher this quote because I can't remember it exactly. I have searched and searched for a man after my own heart, and I have
Mm.
found that man in Willard Richards. And this is the kind of friendship, a deep confidence for each other that is goes beyond just mere friendly acquaintance, but a
Right.
genuine love for each other. And the gospel's full of it. So, and we see that, and it's really awesome that you were out there having that experience. William Penn was trying to do this work, and I'm not going to steal your thunder from your other works you're going to do on it, but there is a wealth of information on this topic in the scriptures and in the stories from the different brethren. Uh, because when you break it all down, brotherhood and sisterhood, I'll add, and fellowshipping and friendship is kind of cuts right at the core. The Savior says the two great commandments, and upon this hang all the law and the prophets, that you love the Lord your God with all your heart, might, mind, and strength. And the second is like unto it. And he says, like unto it, because it's the same kind of love.
Hmm.
And we'll get into what that love is, but you love your neighbors yourself. And in the Hebrew, where it first states that, I think Deuteronomy, and then later in the New Testament, which is written in Aramaic and then into Greek, all three of those languages use a similar meaning in their language for that word love. And it's quite complicated, but I studied into this because I wanted to understand it. The uh, the best way I can describe it is service properly motivated. You serve properly motivated the Lord your God, and you serve properly motivated your neighbor. And
Mm.
it's that properly motivation is bound in love for the other person. But it's
Right.
an action. There's an action element to it, and that's where the service comes in. So, by serving the Lord properly, we and serving our neighbors properly, this principle of brotherhood starts coming into view.
Yeah.
And let's be real. I mean, in today's world, what do we see? What do we see around us? I mean, Democrats, Republicans, Mormon, Christian, you name it. There's, atheists and all these people, and they have taken sides. And like we've seen in the last little while, we have started to see this get deadly. They're
Yes.
willing to take the life or lives of somebody that they believe is less valuable because of their beliefs or the things that they say. And there's a massive divide. And I'm not going to say that this is the only day that it's been in. I mean, obviously, this is throughout the history of the world. This is persecution.
Right.
But Charlie Kirk gets assassinated. We've seen, countless things on the news about just terrible things people do to each other. And guy drives into a church and, shoots a bunch of LDS people, and all this stuff is the devil really working overboard, I feel like, to draw these divides between us. And it can be a division over ideology or political beliefs or spiritual beliefs or color of your skin or whatever it is. He wants to divide us up. And as fundamentalists, we know all about dividing.
Yeah.
We've been doing it. And, not to say the Christians and the rest of the restoration hasn't, but there's a way that we can start to tackle this on a principle basis. How do we deal with other people? And why do we feel so drawn to destroy someone for believing differently?
Right.
You know,
You
the
know, oh,
Go
sorry,
ahead.
go ahead.
No,
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 go
go ahead.
finish your thought.
I was gonna say I could talk for hours if you let me. So I was just saying, just reading earlier, in Proverbs, I know that Proverbs is just a bunch of good sayings, but they're sometimes really interesting. He says, this is Proverbs 18:24. A man that hath friends must show himself friendly, and there is a friend that sticketh closer than a brother.
Mm,
You got to be friendly. And what kind of things can we do? I talked to a man the other day who is a staunch conservative, and he's married to a liberal.
wow.
And he says, "Yeah, sometimes she drives me crazy, but I love her to death."
Right.
And I was
Right.
like, there's something to that. I actually appreciate that.
You know, as I went to Philadelphia, it was only a couple weeks, just under 2 weeks removed from when Charlie Kirk was assassinated. And
Mm,
I did the 2 episodes on him, and I thought, okay, hopefully I'm done with this now, right? I don't like commenting on these things. I feel I'm woefully um I'm woefully unqualified to do so, right? And so I wasn't feeling real good about it. I didn't enjoy having those conversations because it's not really what I want to do, right? It's
mm,
unpleasant. Nobody wants to do it. However, I still felt like I was missing something, right? Not that anything that we talked about before wasn't correct or I didn't think it was true. It was just felt like I was missing something. And I am so thankful for the way the Lord works because we weren't even supposed to be there till about this time. We had to move our trip because of some other things that were going on, and so I wasn't even supposed to be there as early as I was. But boy, I sure glad I am. And it caused me to do some looking once I got home, and I had all these just collection of notes and little videos I made for myself to remind myself of what I was feeling at that moment. And the thing that jumped out to me as I did research on phases that our country has went through over the years, it became readily apparent. And I don't say this haphazardly. I don't say this um, out, just throwing it around. I'm very serious about this. We might be right now as divided as the country was during the Civil War, right? And this time it's not geographical. It's ideological, right? Mixed everywhere. And that spooks me a lot. And I think if we're going to kind of steady the boat, so to speak, we have got to get to a point to where we are willing to listen to other people. Certainly not back away from our principles, and certainly not fight for those things that we feel are correct. But we can't just hunker down. We can't just shut off one side. Um, and that's going to take a lot from those of us who proclaim to follow Christ, because we are now going to have to lock in and do some things that, quite frankly, I'm not wanting to do, right? Which is engage with people that you vehemently disagree with and then hear them out. But I think that's really our only hope at this point is this idea of brotherhood, of getting back to some sort of unity on the macro level, right? On the national level. Because I think as a society, we are sick and we got to figure out how it is we get better. And I think this is a big part of that.
yeah. And I think in that process, then, fundamentalists and other real adherence to the gospel, there's an idea that there's the truth, there's the right way, and everything else is not good.
Mm-hmm.
And that is true. There is the truth, and there's the one way. And we're striving for that. But that doesn't mean that people who feel differently have different set of value.
Yeah.
This is how Nazi Germany did what they did. By
Yes.
devaluing a certain group of people, you can tolerate all manner of, quite frankly, abhorrent behavior. Certainly not in keeping with our values. So as people feel to interact with, on a national level with people who may feel different or think different, what kind of conversations should we be having, and what should our motivation be?
Right.
Because this is going to determine a lot about the kind of conversations we're going to have. Because, if your motivation is to prove them wrong,
Yep.
then I'm sorry, you're partaking of the same spirit that is dividing the country.
Yep.
But we're not there to prove anybody wrong. What we should be doing is recognizing that their soul has inherent value in the eyes of God. And if it were possible, and if we have the ability to remove ourselves from our place and say, we hold the priesthood, we should be acting for God. He is the father of all of these children. Now, if that was my child who was led astray, or maybe they have a false belief or a false ideology in this world, and we understand some of the truth, how would he deal with them to help them? Not just throw them to the wolves or prove them wrong, or, man, if they would just die, then all this problem would go away. What do you think he would do? And in reality, for those of us who believe, what does he do? He continues to work with people. You lay out the truth in a plain and clear manner and say, this is the way that it is. We have to be very clear and, I would say, concise on what the truth is, and make sure that we don't fudge. We're not lying in any way, because there's always going to be that temptation. When I was, before I was married and a little after, I was involved with the Republican Party in my area. And the way it is in Utah, they have the Republican Party divided down into, they call them, little vectors or something. There's a word, I can't remember it, but they have delegates from each of these areas that the people in the area are supposed to vote, part of the Republican Party. Well, these delegates, which I was one of them, there's like 2,500 of us in the state, and our vote is what gets a candidate on the Republican ballot for Utah. So we kind of became a rare item, and we got to meet, some of the senators and some of the representatives and the governors and all these people who are trying to get on the ballot. And they would take us to breakfast and they would do their spill and try to get our vote. But I got out of it for one reason, because there was lying all the way around. And this is the Republican Party. This is the one that's, many people believe is supposed to be standing up for truth. And they were snakes. They were going behind people's back and lying and swearing falsely and all the things that were not in keeping with my faith. And I said, I have to resign. I can't go to my people in my area that I'm supposed to represent and say, yeah, vote for this guy. He's less of a snake than the other guy.
Right.
Like, I can't do that in good conscience, but yet, so as we start interacting with the outside world, and many people I realize people have already been doing this, but make sure that we're honest and truthful in everything we do. Sometimes it's hard for us to want to tell the truth, because some of us that grew up in this society, where, our parents were polygamists, our grandparents were polygamists, and there's always a fear that the law's going to take you and throw you in jail.
Mm-hmm.
And be wise about it. Don't cast your pearls before swine, as it were, but you can stand up and defend the truth
Yep.
and say, this is what we need today. Because without, I'll say that this way, there's a way to communicate the truth in a compassionate and a loving way that it may be offensive to people whose consciences are plucked, perhaps, or pricked a little bit, but it's not meant to be offensive. That's not the motivation that you've decided to serve these people. And I promise, if people would approach other individuals as though they have inherent value and bless them, you will see massive change in their life. Not very
Yep.
many of us are going to be able to reach millions of people. We have our circle of influence, our friends, our neighbors, the ones we come in contact with. We really ought to start there. So we have a
Absolutely.
neighbor who believes something totally different than us. I remember growing up, we had neighbors who were Muslim. And we actually got along with them really, really good. They weren't extremists or anything, but they kept to their faith. We kept to ours. And we found out there was lots of areas that we overlapped.
Right.
And I really appreciated them. They were good neighbors. Now,
Yeah.
we didn't sit down and talk Joseph Smith or any of that, but I could still speak the truth with them. And I was young, but that made an impression on me as a young person. So, in our circle of influence, what do we do to help bless people? What are we
Yeah.
willing to do? You know?
That is the question, right? And you asked another question, or I shouldn't say question, but you brought some stuff up here that I think is really pertinent to the conversation at hand. And you you talked about, yes, there is absolute truth, and we have some of that, right?
Mhm.
But what good is being right or having the truth if you can't bring others along with you? What good is it? I contend it might be good for you. It's going to be good for your family. But I do believe when we get to the other side, the Lord's going to ask, "What'd you do with all that truth I gave you?" Right?
Mm.
Well, Lord, I went out and I defended it. Yeah, but you didn't bring anybody with you.
Right.
What good is it? And I'm reminded, gosh, I'm going to get beat up over this because I get beat up over every time I bring up Abraham Lincoln on the podcast because it's a mixed bag, right? I understand Lincoln took extreme executive um, privilege there to a new level, but there's an interesting account of Lincoln trying to talk to Thaddeus Stevens when they were trying to pass an amendment. Now, for anyone who doesn't know, Thaddeus Stevens was a firebrand. I mean, he was pushing for that amendment like nobody's business. And come hell or high water, didn't matter. He's going forward. He's just going to like bulldoze his way through there. And Lincoln realizes this is going to be a problem, right? Lincoln feels like he's correct, but it's a problem in the way he's delivering it. So there was a party at the White House, and you can find this account in the book Team of Rivals. It's a great book. And he's talking to Thaddeus Stevens, and he tells a story about when he was surveying. And he said, for many years I surveyed. And he said, and it's true that the compass will point you north, but the compass has no advice about the various chasms, swamps, deserts, or bodies of water that you will encounter. And what good is it to know which direction you're heading if you end up finding a hole and falling into it, right? So you never sacrifice on the truth. You never back down from principles that are true. But just like Paul was, sometimes you got to figure out a different way of being able to communicate that so that you can get the message across. The other thing I'll say is that too often when we are having discussions, And look, I want to say I am guilty of this. I am not saying I am without sin when it comes to this. But sometimes we get arguing about stuff and we just want to win, right? Above all else. And you're talking to a guy who's hyper competitive. I love to win and I hate to lose. I hate to lose more than I love to win, right? I mean, that kind of competitive fire. But I think the guys who really make a difference are the guys who first look to reconciliate before winning. And I think that's kind of what you're alluding to there as you say, how are we going to bless them, right? You can't bless somebody if you abhor them, right? And certainly some people are just going to be beyond touching, right?
Mhm.
They've isolated themselves in a place. Those folks, I think you just got to kind of like move on from. But I believe that the vast majority of humanity hangs in the balance. And as we share this truth, they're going to want to we're going to want to be very careful on how we do it. I The other thing that came to mind as you were talking there, Dave, is when I first came into Mormonism, I came in exactly the right place. I mean, the Lord absolutely guided me into the ward boundaries that I would become a Mormon in. And I remember one night I was thinking, really, I am just the product of the love that people have poured into me, right? I mean, and I think we all are. And for some people, they didn't get that. And that leads to a lot of things. And I think we have to be cognizant of that fact too as we go about this. But anyway, just kind of some side tangents there.
Oh, that's super good. You know, as we, one of the things that comes to mind, and I think this is so important because you will hear, as we start interacting with all of the different people who may think different, or if we feel that we're supposed to stand up for truth, what does the Lord tell us to do in relation to it? And I keep going back to this in my mind because, does he say anything about how to deal with people who are not of your faith, people who think different than you? And it sure seems like I got a page here and it's just full of quotes, and they're all about brotherly love, all about brotherly kindness, on and on. Love the brotherhood, love his brethren, and then, he that loveth his brother abideth in the light. And there's so our brother and our sister is all of God's children. We should have this love for each other and this desire to serve and this desire to bless. So, one of the things that comes up all the time when you start interacting with people is, how are you going to make a difference in their life if you have no what we call moral authority with them?
Mhm.
Like, if there's anybody out there that says, how do I start this process? Well, the scriptures are full. It starts right here. What can
Absolutely.
you do today to make you a better person? What can you do to maybe be a little more kind, or at least show somebody that you care about them because of who they are, not what they do or what they stand for? You want to make a difference in somebody's life? Show them that. And if you don't feel like you can show them that, you need to find something within yourself. And I'll tell you, hands down, for all of us religious people, which this is primarily your audience, right?
Hmm.
You got to get close to your Father in heaven in a
Yeah.
real way. And if you can't see someone else's value, ask him, help me see this person as you see them, because I'm not seeing it. I'm seeing somebody that I would just as soon kick to the side and not have anything to do with. You know, Jesus
Absolutely.
comes, Jesus comes down and he does his ministry amongst the poor and the despised, amongst men. Alma and
Right.
Amulek preach the gospel to the poor and the cast out and the trodden down, because they're usually the people who are humble, but
Right.
also it shows something. If you just want to befriend the powerful, are you
Right.
sure your motives are right? What do you really think's going on? And not to say that the powerful don't have value. I'm reminded of King Agrippa in the New Testament, where he tells Paul, "Thou almost persuadest me to be a Christian," because he's preaching to the king.
Yep.
So we have responsibilities there too. And even with that, we should be sure of ourselves, sure of our testimony, and preach the principles of godliness. Because you can create all the laws you want for a country, it actually isn't going to make good people. If you don't
No.
have morality, then laws don't do anything.
Nope. Nope. Look, this idea of and I hate to say this, the idea of trying to legislate morality is kind of a losing battle, right? You
Yeah,
might get someone to change their behavior, but you haven't really changed the heart, right? And as a guy who struggled with addiction early in his life, I can tell you until there's a change of heart, you will find whatever reason it is to a revert back to those old ways. You need something to
sure.
change the heart that will extract those things from your heart. I don't think it's a coincidence that Christ talks about becoming new at baptism, right? I think that there is this idea of letting the old you die as you come forward something else, right? And writing those commandments upon the heart so that they're no longer just stone, they're flesh, right? They're in us. And
Right.
and you're right. If we want to reach, let's look at the gospel, right? If we're talking the gospel of someone, and if our goal is, someone wants to learn the gospel, I contend that you're going to have a really hard time helping the spirit convert anybody if they don't feel a love coming from you, right?
Absolutely.
If you're just out there to check a box like, yep, did my missionary work, that's good, but you're not going to be real effective, right? I mean, that's a
Yeah.
good place to start, but that's not certainly where you want that to end.
Yeah. And, we've been talking a lot about the political spectrum, but there's something even a little deeper we can dive into in relation to the
Yeah.
restoration. You know, why was Heber C. Kimball so effective in England? Was it just because he was a man full of the spirit and he could preach like nobody's business, or maybe he was eloquent with words? Well, we know he wasn't. We know that he was. I mean, if you read
Right.
his letters, his spelling and grammar was atrocious. But
Right.
but it says something when there's that one story, and somebody who recently read it could remember it way better. But when he comes to that one town and all the people start laying out their coats for him to walk on,
Right.
you don't do that for someone who you think is being a bully or is a
No.
dictator because of their position. Is somebody they I guarantee they genuinely felt the love in his heart for them. And I think it was the same for the other ones, the 12, for Brigham and for the other members, that their their preaching was so effective because of the spirit that they carried. And it wasn't just the message they had. It had to be something inside. It had to be that
Yes.
love that they had for them that you could feel. And I've been involved in missionary work, not the same kind as them. I haven't been out preaching on street corners in London, but interacting with people coming from the church and from Christianity and other places that are interested in the fullness of the gospel. And I'll tell you, friends first, converts later.
Yep.
Be a friend to
Yep.
somebody because it's so rare out there. Listen to their story. Try to understand where they're coming from. Sympathize with them. Suffer with them if need be, which is almost always going to be the case.
Yep.
People are lonely. They crave this attachment and this friendship because who can they trust? Joseph Smith says this, men that you think will be your friends, and the second you teach them doctrine they don't agree with, they'll come for your life, something like that. You probably remember the quote better, but
Yeah.
there's something about being a friend that
No,
really
it
gets people.
it is so, so true. And look, I want to say this. I don't want anyone to think that you have to get to this place to start, right?
Right.
That you're going to just need to sequester yourself in a room and beat yourself up until you get to that point where you just have love for all men. I don't think it really works that way. I think it's like any other thing we try to learn and to grow a good habit in. It's going to take time. It's going to take
Right.
practice more than time. Um,
Right.
there's a story here that happened to me um once when I was um still in the LDS church. This was right before we left Idaho to move to North Dakota. I was in a ward in Caldwell, Idaho, and I was in that ward all of a week and a half, and I get a phone call from the bishop saying, "Hey, can you come in and meet with me and the stake president?" I'm like, "Oh, oh no." Right. And I go in and they're like, "Hey, we would like you to be the ward mission leader." And I'm like, I don't know anybody, right? Like I don't know anyone. I don't know, like I barely know you, and that's only because you first shook my hand and introduced yourself and then called me. Like you got the wrong guy here. I'm not saying you don't get revelation, but that phone line may have been a little fuzzy. And he's like, "Look, I'm certain about this." I'm like, "All right." So, I take the calling, and that first week he comes in and he says, "Okay, look, we're going to break you in real nice and easy. I don't want to overwhelm you. I get that you're new to this ward, so we're going to break you in really nice and easy." Then a week later, a 70 shows up from Salt Lake and says, "Hey, we need to really get going here. There are people out there that are suffering that can use the gospel, and they're probably on your inactive rolls," is what he said. And so he said, and I'll never forget it. He kind of pointed out towards the audience. He didn't know who I was, obviously, but he pointed out to the audience. He's like, "And you ward mission leaders, you need to spearhead this." And I was like, "Oh no, no." And so I the sacrament meeting ends, and I just lock eyes with my bishop, and I just kind of give him one of these, right? "Come here." And he comes walking over. He's like, "Yeah, you're not getting broken easy. Sorry about this." Right. And so we next just go, and he starts printing me the rolls, right? And he starts, telling me the people that are inactive he hadn't seen for a while or ever. And he said, "Why don't you and your ward missionaries go out and make contact with these folks?" And there was one family named the CO family. And I had tried and tried to get there when someone was home, right? I knocked on the door a few times, got a kid or two, but really not much else. And then, as everyone's well aware, I love football, right? And it's Monday night. My team is playing, right? I got a vested interest. It's been a long day at work. I'm like, yeah, I'm just coming home. I'm gonna order a pizza and I'm gonna watch some football, right? So I get comfortable, and like about midway through the second quarter, I get this prompting like, "You should go try the COs again." And I'm like, "No, I've tried a whole bunch and they're never there. I'm not doing it." And I just keep watching the game, and it's that little thing in the back of your mind, right? I hope you know what I'm talking about. I hope
I
I'm not
do.
the only guy this stubborn, but it's just in the back of your mind. Just go, just go, just go. Finally, I get to halftime, and I'm like, "Fine, I'll go. I'll go. I'll miss part of my game, but I'll go." So I get in my car. I drive, the couple blocks down the road. I get out. I knock on the door. The husband answers the door, and you can tell immediately he is not happy to see me, right? And I'm like, "Hey, my name's Dave. I'm from the local ward," and I can see his wife is standing right behind him. And I'm like, My name's Dave. I'm here from the ward, and we just wanted to know if there's anything we could do for you. We miss you. What can we do to help? Checking on you." And it was the shortest conversation ever. He's like, "Absolutely nothing. We're good. Thanks." And then just shut the door. And I just remember I kind of took 2 steps off the porch and I just looked up at the sky and I'm like, are you happy? Right? Like that was fruitful. Right? And then I went back in my car and I went home and I finished the game. Then about 2 weeks later, I get a phone call from Sister CO, this man's wife. And I had given one of the kids my phone number and said, on one of the previous visits and said, hey, can you have your mom or dad call me? And that's how she got my number. And she called me and she is just in tears and brokenhearted. And she said, um, I didn't know who else to call, but my husband has cleaned out our bank accounts. He has taken every card that I have. He took one of the cars and just left a note saying he'd met another woman, had fallen in love, and has to go pursue his truth wherever it lies. And I have nothing. And I just, in that moment, I was so ashamed of myself for pardon the expression, pissing and moaning on my chair and not putting it on my big boy pants and going sooner. Not that I think the outcome would have been any different, but I felt ashamed in that moment. And I remember the bishop, I called the bishop that night and I'm like, hey, we got to do something here. And he's like, I'll pick you up in about 15 minutes. We'll go down, we'll take a look, and we'll get this solved. And this bishop was one of the most stellar men I'd ever met. And so we jump in the car, we go down there. The bishop calls his financial clerk in, and they just immediately start going to work. And they really take care of this woman and her kids. And so she starts coming back to church. And about 2 months later, I'm standing in a font and I'm baptizing all of her children. And it was a privilege of a lifetime.
Yeah.
But it wouldn't have happened, I don't think, had I not done my job. It probably would have. The Lord would have found somebody else, right? It still would have
Yeah.
happened. That's an arrogant thought. But there are so many, I believe, opportunities we miss because we're just not wanting to engage, right?
Yeah.
Um, I'm I'm I I'm a guy who, when my wife met me, I had hair down to the middle of my back, both my ears were pierced. I had a couple tattoos. I mean, I grew up rough, right? But no one realized I was searching for something, right? I had questions of an eternal nature that needed to be answered. And, and I don't blame anyone for not approaching me with those things, because I'm not sure I would have been as receptive, right? I did have one friend. His name was Lee. He tried to say, well, if you're investigating religion, you got to investigate mine, right? And I'm like, yeah, I'll stop drinking coffee. That'll fix it. And he, so I probably wasn't real receptive either. But we don't know where someone's at. We don't know what they've gone through. We don't know where they're at currently. And I think we do them a disservice. And quite frankly, I think we do God a disservice by not trying to engage more with his children, even the ones we disagree with.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. I think anybody who has put their shoulder to the wheel, as it were, is going to have those kind of stories. And you're exactly right. So you don't feel worthy. So you don't feel capable. You say, well, I don't have the gift of gab like maybe other people do. I can't just sit down and talk to people. I'm kind of an introvert. I don't like people. There's something you can do. I guarantee it. And do people matter? And
Yes.
I think that this story, and you can answer this because we all know the answer. Before you had done that work for this lady and her family, they were just a person.
Yeah.
But after, it was a different story. There was
Absolutely.
investment on your part, major investment. And when you get the opportunity to bless somebody in a way, whether you meant to or not, or the Lord put this into your life, and you found yourself at the linchpin for this massive work to be done in someone else's life, and you just got to be an instrument in the hands of God to do it. It wasn't like, I understand what you're saying. I've been in those situations. It wasn't me, it wasn't you, but we were willing. And the Lord opened the door and said, hey, here's somebody you can bless. And I'll tell you, it breaks down a lot of things inside of us. We begin to develop this compassion. And it's kind of like the old, there's an old kind of nursery rhyme type thing where, you know, if you're in a canoe, start moving, because you can't steer unless you're moving. And even if you have to go the wrong way for a minute, do something and then get
Right.
yourself right and start. Not everybody's going to get asked to do a calling like you did in your ward, but everyone can bless somebody. There was times growing
Absolutely.
up where I remember one time, and things were not always rosy for us. We didn't have a lot of money. And I remember one time when we were just right down to the bare bones of our food, and one of the neighbors went and got, I guess they gathered up some people, but we went out one morning to go get in our van, and it was loaded full of groceries from that night. And that
Wow.
was just people blessing us. And how did they know? How did they know what we were
Right.
struggling with? I don't know. I was just a little kid going, well, what's all these groceries doing? And of course, my mother's emotional and about it because we really needed help.
Yeah.
And I mean, this story that you tell, and we could go on and on telling stories like this, because this is the foundation of um, this whole entire subject is, what can you do to bless somebody else's life? Not everybody needs food, or not everyone needs the same kind of help. I've met people who, in my ministry, I'll call it, just trying to go out and serve and preach the gospel in the best way possible. I've met people who were just broken emotionally, and they had a rough go of it. They had a rough life, and people have not been nice because maybe they were different than other folks, or they looked different, or they act different, or whatever it was. And for them to come back sometimes years later and say, you made a difference in my life. And I go, what did I do? He says, you treated me like a person when no one else would. And I went, well, was that hard to do? Was it hard for me to say, feed somebody because they were hungry, or, take someone and go do something fun with them, or just be available? I mean, in today's world with our phones and the messaging and all this stuff, you know, you can message somebody at any time. Hey, how you doing? Been praying about you. Here's a scripture. Maybe this will help your day. Who cannot do that?
Right.
Do you know anybody in your life that you think could use a little uplifting? Man, go to and do it. Start doing this work and watch the doors fly open in front of you. And you will find yourself in sometimes complicated situations, for sure, but you'll get some really, really good experience. And, you want to have value for people, listen to their story, really listen, and say, you know what? There's something here. Because the Heavenly Father knows each one of his children. He has tremendous amount of compassion. He knows them better than we do, for sure. But if you're finding yourself going, man, I don't know what to do, everything seems so taken care of, you just open your eyes, look to your neighbors, look to the people around you in your ward or in your church or group or whatever you want to call it. If you stand up, if you ever have an opportunity to talk in church, look out over the audience, look into people's eyes. What do you see? Do you see people who are hungry, maybe hungry for affection, or need some, it's not always money and food and things that we can bless people with. Sometimes it's friendship. Go to your wife. Hey, dear, I went to church and I saw Sister so and so. I know her husband passed away a couple months ago. Should we invite her over for Sunday dinner? Get to know her. Sure, it's a little awkward. If you're an introvert, it's super awkward to invite somebody in and have this, but you might just gain a friend out of it. And you might save somebody's life.
100%. 100%. You know, we, and speaking nationally now, right? And whenever you're ready to move on to the other, we can here. But speaking nationally right now, I think we have to recognize that certainly the generation younger than us, right? They grew up in a much different world than you and I would have grown up in, right?
Mm,
Um, I remember as a kid, if I had a bad day at school, well, it was over at 3:30 when I went home, right? And tomorrow's a new day. Now those kids pack that with them wherever they go in their pocket with their phone, right? And I do believe that we are dealing with a damaged generation now. And I think one of the big questions is how are we going to respond as followers of Christ? Are we going to continue to punish them for that brokenness, or are we going to reach out in brotherly affection and try to befriend them and then say there's a better way, right? I'm not saying it's a panacea that it'll cure everything, but it sure is a great start.
yeah, right. And I've got this quote that it might be good. I mean, because I know me, I could talk for hours and hours, but not everybody
Oh,
can
you're
listen.
good.
There's a
You're
quote
good.
from John Taylor, and I just want to read part of it because it kind of ties into what we've been talking about and then goes on to the next subject. It's on page 258 of the Gospel Kingdom. It's called The Ideal of United Brotherhood. And he says, I cannot conceive of anything more beautiful and heavenly than a united brotherhood organized after the pattern laid down in the Doctrine and Covenants, when all act for the benefit of all. When while we love God with all our hearts, we love our neighbor as ourselves, where our time, our property, our talents, our mental and bodily powers are all exerted for the good of all, where no man grabs or takes advantage of another, where there's a common interest, a common purse, a common stock, where, as they did on this continent, it is said of them that they all dealt justly to each other, and all acted for the general wealth. When every man in every place could meet a brother and a friend, when all the generous and benevolent influences and sympathies of our nature are carried out, and covetousness, arrogance, hatred, and pride, and every evil are subdued and brought into subjection to the will and spirit of God. These principles are very beautiful and would be very happifying for a community, a territory, a state, nation, or the world.
Wow.
And John Taylor has a way with words.
She sure does. His
But
English heritage sure does
oh yeah,
just come screaming through in those things.
and there's so this ties in. Yeah, for the world, there's these principles. Everyone we meet, we should behave as brethren to.
Hmm.
But in the church and in the restoration, it's been fractured and splintered, and there's all these kind of people who believe similarly and differently. And some of the
Right.
most hated people are not the ones that are so far away, but they're the ones that were, involved in a split just 20 years ago, or the traditions have been passed down by, say you're in the, they call them the Brighamite churches and the Prairie churches. It's like, oh, those guys, they're
Right.
way off, whoever they're going for. But, you know, I've met some people in the Prairie churches that are just some good souls. I don't agree with their
Right.
doctrine on everything, but there's some really, really good people. And I think I have some responsibility to befriend them and help understand their position. And maybe we don't have a lot of doctrinal discussions because we know we disagree. That's okay. What common ground do we have? And can I be a force for good in their life? Maybe. But I love having the conversations anyway. Uh, and for us as fundamentalists, when you start talking about the church, The church has gone astray. We feel that way. We feel that the leadership has gone down a road that we are not interested in following, or else that's where we would be. But my neighbors here that are in the local ward, they're some good people, really good people. And do I care about them? Do I care about them in a way that I would be willing to bless them in the way they need to be blessed, not in the way that I just want to bless them? Because if they get interested in the fullness of the gospel, that's great. We'll talk about it. What if they're not? How does
Right.
agency play into this? How do we bless people in the way they need to be blessed?
100%. I think that is such an important point, right? Bless them in the way that they need blessed, right? Um, if there's one thing I don't like, it's a numbers game when you start talking about conversion, right?
mm,
I just detest that. And I think one of the reasons is because God is very clear that, all souls are precious to me. All of them. He makes it clear. He didn't send Christ to die just for those who were already living a great life, right? He went for everybody. And I think Paul is a great example of this, right? Look, Paul's a guy who's out there persecuting Christians, ordering the deaths of some Christians, right? This is why the Savior's the Savior and I'm not, because I'd have been like, yeah, he's about to have an accident, right? But what does the Lord do? He sees with different eyes, Dave. He looks, right? And the fractionalism that exists within Mormonism, it runs deep, right? I didn't realize how deep it ran until I started really probing, right? And I'm like, whoo, there's some leftover stuff in here, right? Like it's, it's poignant and it's tough and I'm not cheapening that in any way. I understand that they're matters of conscience and principle, but that doesn't mean we have to hate each other either, though, right? Especially within Mormonism, where if you're from a Brighamite tradition, right, you and I don't go to the same place for church, right? But that doesn't mean we have to hate each other, right? We
right,
share about 95%, in my estimation, the same beliefs.
right,
That should count for something.
right. And let's not let our differences define us.
Right.
They exist, but they exist with the person that sits in the row front of me at my church. Some
Yep.
differences exist. They happen to not be ones that we can't tolerate. So, I mean, but I'll tell you what, you and I both feel this way. If either one of us comes to the meetings that either one of us, we're just happy to see you.
Yeah.
It's great. No
Absolutely.
problem. You know,
Absolutely.
we may be asked to serve people. You were mentioning Paul, and I just looked up because I couldn't remember exactly the name, but how would you like to be Ananias?
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
this guy's going to come, and he's like, whoa, wait a minute. I know this
Right.
guy.
Right.
Why are you blessing him? Why is he coming here? And I'll bet you Ananias felt very, very different about Saul or Paul after that,
Yeah, I
because he
think
served
so.
him,
Yep.
you know? And with all my friends in the different groups and the different areas, the ones that I've listened to and the ones that I've had interactions with, I can understand why they're where they are.
Yeah.
And that's okay to me. I could say, well, you're not holding to the truth and but what? You're going to go to hell? Really? Are you so
Right.
sure that everything that you believe is so right? And yet we're moving forward. We're asking the Lord for light and we're trying to come together. And there's something to that. And I'll tell you, we would get a lot farther if we would serve one another. How was it in the days of Jesus when after he died and goes over to the Nephites? We don't know the status of their people. We don't know if there was fractures or splinters. We know a lot of people died, and there was this great cataclysm, and the people that he came to went and gathered at the temple, and he came and united them and blessed them and set them on this path, and they became one people. What would that be like in our day? I think there would have to be some destructions. There'd have to be some things to prepare us. But
Right.
there's a lot of good that we can do together rather than separate and apart. And yet I understand those things need to be there. I'm not advocating for a complete breakdown of all the social structures and everything, but that doesn't mean we have to treat people poorly.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people do really good. I will say a lot of people do really good. But if you put yourself in a place where you can be a genuine help, again, it comes back. You've got to have a relationship with your Father in heaven and bless people the way they need to be blessed, like we said. There's an old story, and it may be apocryphal. I just remember hearing it, but it was about Gandhi. The
Yeah.
the guy over in India that he
Yep.
was a pacifist and nonviolent. What's the word? You know it. Uh,
Nonviolent resistance.
Nonviolent resistance. But one of the Hindus came to him and said, "I know that you're all for nonviolence and everything, but the Muslims killed my son in this war that was happening. Muslims killed my son. What am I supposed to do?" And I thought his response, according to the story, was so interesting. He says, "Go and find a little Muslim boy whose parents have died and raise him as a Muslim."
Ooh.
And I
Ooh.
thought, there's something to that. Would we be able to do that? You know?
I hope so. I hope so. I hope I could be that man, right? I can't say for sure. I won't ever pretend to say I could or couldn't because I'm not in that position, and thankfully
Right.
so.
Be hard.
But it would be hard. I my mind draws to two things, right? With a story like that. One was years back. I want to say it's been over a decade now. I might be wrong. Um, as I get older, time seems to get more and more mushed and scrambled.
Yeah.
But there was an Amish community where a man came in and just shot a bunch of young Amish children
Hmm.
and a bunch of Amish adults. And they ended up looking after his wife, the man who shot those people. They looked after his wife. And one of the parts of the story that I find so moving is that one of the men that were in the group that went over to his wife to first make contact, the perpetrator's wife, his child was one of the children that were killed.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, I got a long ways to go.
Yeah.
I've got a long ways to go. And what some members of the LDS Church did in the face of what happened in Michigan is absolutely inspiring. Look,
Yeah.
I've had my differences with the church, and I've been vocal about them when I felt like it was necessary.
Hmm.
But there's something good there, right?
Yeah.
Something was good there, and something good came out of that. And I think we have to start working towards being those people. I'm not sure I'd ever get to that place. I hope so, right? I'm working real hard at it, but that's a different level of discipleship than
Yeah.
what I think many of us ever encounter. And so here's my question, Dave. How do we get there?
I'll think about that because there is a complicated answer and there's a simple answer. And for people
Mhm.
who don't know what happened with the church in Michigan, what you're referencing is they were raising money for the shooter's family, right?
Mhm.
And they raise like the goal was $500,000, but they raised quite a bit of money to
I
give to
did.
them, because at the end of the day, they're just victims of a different sort.
Yep.
But I really think that the path to that kind of discipleship, it has to be the recognition that we're all just one big family here. And, we live in a place and a time where it seems that mental health struggles are going crazy, and people do things that they wouldn't do had they had their full faculties. And
Right.
we have to be able to understand that and put that into our our sheet of variables, because we have to say, well, who was it really? Anybody
Right.
who's had a friend or a family member who perhaps passed away because of suicide, because of their mental health, you feel very hesitant to say, they deserved it. I mean, and anybody
Right.
who says that, it's just almost distasteful and uncomfortable. You don't
Right.
know the struggle. You don't know the struggle other people are having. And,
Right.
we talk about this brotherly kindness towards each other, and this true caring in a real way, this service with purpose. This is what it looks like in action. And this was kind of publicized. And so we know about it. But, what about the ones that aren't so publicized? And we've
Right.
talked a little bit about them. Little acts of kindness every day that help change people's lives for the better. We're asked to minister and to fellowship with those in our societies in a very real way. And that may look different for different people. It might be that guys like you and I, who know how to cook a good steak, invite somebody over who doesn't, and teach them all about the gospel, because we're having a good meal together, and we're doing good for them. Sometimes it's, like I say, it's calling someone up and remembering that it's not just the bishop's job. It's not just the elders quorum president's job to check up on the people. If you feel something, go do it. Go bless somebody's life. And because those people in leadership positions, it's a different kind of feeling. It you If you take upon yourself, and this is for all the men out there who have responsibilities, and the women. There's Relief Society presidents, there's all these callings in the different churches, and they're asked to minister and serve the people. When you take upon yourself the spirit of that calling, you're going to get yourself in some interesting situations, but you have opportunity to bless people. A good friend of mine told me one time, well, it's no more than a good friend, but he says, when you get called into these positions, or you're put in a place to really help someone, sometimes helping someone looks a lot more like climbing down in the mud with them to get them out. And
Yep.
it's not fun. But
100%.
you can be supreme in your assurance that you're doing the thing God wants you to do, and he'll protect you. How many of us would hesitate for a moment to go into someone's house and give them a blessing for the sick, uh, even if they had a disease that we didn't really want to get?
Right.
If you're really up to the spirit of your calling, would you say, not going to go do it because I might get this sickness? Or you say, God has asked me to do this. I'm going to go do my best. And if I die in the line of my duty. That should be what we're about, because the priesthood and the church organization and all these helps and things the Lord has given us is for the blessing of the saints. You have Joseph Smith and all of the men in Nauvoo when the malaria was going around, spending all of their time and effort just blessing people to try to help them get better. Now, what glory is there in that?
Right.
That's just real discipleship. That's real brotherhood. And do you know of somebody who's struggling? I mean, we all do. Sometimes we don't know how to help people. And sometimes all we can do is pray for them. And that's legitimate. But in our prayers, I would wager and say, if you ask the Lord, not just, okay, bless them so that I get this off my conscience, what could I do to help, to genuinely help? The opportunity will open up. And
Absolutely.
like that story, I can't remember the man's name, but I've heard it so many times growing up. It's Brother Tanner. I'm sure it's a popular story in the church, but he had gathered up all their food supplies. They were starving. They were in the cabin in the 1800s, and they didn't have a lot of food left. And but Brother Tanner says we need to set this food aside. Someone's coming, and they're going to need it. Set aside some of it. And I might get the story a little wrong, but this is the gist of it. And a man came to the door, knocked on the door, and he opened it, and he said, "Do you have any food?" He says, "Yep, we have this food." Take their meager supplies and give it to them. And if I remember right, the man said, "An angel told me to come and find you, and you would be able to bless my family." And he
Mm.
walked away. And Brother Tanner, I think he wrote in his journal, "I'm just grateful that the Lord knows Brother Tanner." You know, I mean, and yeah, we may not be there. We may not be able to be inspired to that level, but we can get there.
Yeah,
Start doing what you can. And you will find yourself in a position to bless people over and over and over. And you take yourself out of it. It's not a glory thing for any of us that have done this, but you take yourself out of it and you bless people and you invest in them and your life betters. You begin to understand what it means to be a minister, to be a father, to truly care for others. And in the meantime, you're genuinely helping someone who genuinely needs help. And
absolutely.
our Father in heaven knows how to do this. He just is anxious for us to bless each other.
There was a great story that I read that took place, and it's a pretty familiar story. I'm sure you've heard it a few times. There was a town in France, I believe, and kind of their claim to fame is they had this one just immaculate statue commissioned where they of the Savior. And of course, as happens, bombs fly and things get destroyed. And when the bombing had stopped, with just about everyone's homes destroyed, right? I think they said upwards of three-quarters of the homes were destroyed, which means that you're housing an entire community and essentially a third of the homes, right? They threw open the
Mm-hmm.
doors to their fellow townsmen. But during the cleanup, it was what happened to the statue, right? It was kind of it was something that the community valued in total. And they went and they found the statue, and it was remarkably intact, except for the hands that were destroyed during the bombing. So you have this statue of the Savior without hands, without arms. And so they actually held a town meeting, even in their current situation, to find out what they were going to do about this statue. And they talked about, well, let's just see if we can't find the original sculptor and, see if he can fix it. And they said, well, we don't even know if he's alive. And two, we don't have any money. That's not an option. Right. And so, they thought, well, let's see what we can do. And so they tried to fashion some arms, but it just didn't look right. And they had a third and final meeting. And the story goes is that there was an old man in the back who didn't talk much during the first two meetings, but he raises his hand and he tells them his suggestion. And they say, that feels right. And that's what they did. His idea was this: leave the arms off and let's just erect a plaque that says, the Lord has given it to our hands to bless people. And that is a true principle. Look, God, in his omnipotent way, could bless every single one of us and make sure we all have what we need all the time and we wouldn't
Right.
have to struggle. But I don't think we'd learn that way, Dave. And we certainly wouldn't know how to knit our hearts together. And we couldn't have Zion without it, right?
Yeah.
Um, this idea of blessing other people is so vital to forming that brotherhood that we seek. You know, I a couple months back, I was reading in Matthew chapter 16 and verses 17 and 18. I probably read this scripture 100 times, and this never jumped out at me quite like it did this night. But it starts out, and I'm just going to read it here. It says, starting in 17, and Jesus answered and said unto him, Blessed art thou, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood hath not revealed it unto thee, but my Father which is in heaven. Now, this is when Peter testifies of the Savior's sonship, and him being the Savior. And this is where it gets interesting in 18. And he says, And I say unto thee that thou art Peter, and upon this rock will I build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. Now, that's a funny imagery, right? The gates of hell shall not prevail against thee. Because for a long time, Dave, I thought what that gate was doing was keeping hell out. But that's a funny way of wording it if that's what he's implying. What I think he is saying is hell won't stop you from doing your mission. You will
Yeah.
kick down the various gates of hell, those various stages of hell where people are in, both on this side of the veil and the other, and you're on a rescue mission, right? This, if there's one thing that I don't like, it's kind of passive discipleship, right? At some
Yeah.
point, you got to do something. This isn't a spectator sport. You got to get in there, man. You got to do stuff. And the beautiful outgrowth of that, going on a rescue mission, is your heart is going to be knit to somebody else's. And maybe it's you that gets rescued, right? When someone does something when someone does something in service for you, how does it make you feel? Right? I,
Oh,
I don't know about anybody else, but I tend to look at somebody and it's real hard to hold a grudge or to think un- unkindly towards that person because they are imparting a little bit of who they are for my benefit.
yeah.
And it's absolutely vital that we get in the game, right?
Yeah.
And by getting in the game, you will forge bonds of friendship and brotherhood that will last forever.
Yeah. And that's a great segue into kind of the deepest part of this whole entire subject. You know, we talk about forming a real brotherhood. We talk about these principles that we ought to be treating all of God's children. And you know, the Lord laid out a way. The Lord laid out a way in the scriptures for men to be knit together. And I think women too. But he laid out a way for men to be knit together in covenant towards each other. And you know what I'm talking about, I think. But
Mm-hmm.
when he sets up the school of the prophets in section 88,
I
that
have
he
it
has
pulled
the
up on my
covenant of
phone.
brotherhood.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I have it
I mean,
88 133. Yeah, I got it.
yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, if you've got it, why don't you read it? I've got it too. I'll read it with you.
Okay. Art thou a brother or brethren? I salute you in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ. And this is where it starts to get really beautiful. In
Mm,
token of remembrance of the everlasting covenant, in which covenant I receive you to fellowship, in a determination that is fixed, immovable, and unchangeable, to be your friend and brother, through the grace of God, in the bonds of love, to walk in all the commandments of God, blameless in thanksgiving forever and ever. Amen.
it's absolutely astounding. You think about this covenant you could enter into that's everlasting. This covenant, I believe, or something similar, is the foundation for what we call Elohim, the
Mm-hmm.
council of the gods. And over there, over there, they gathered together in this same spirit because they perfected their characters and they've gotten to this place. They've blessed everyone they've come in contact with, and now they've entered into a covenant with each other that they will receive them into fellowship, that they're determined to do this, and they'll be friend and brother in the grace of God, in the bonds of love, to walk in all the commandments. This is a heavy duty covenant
Yes,
that
it
is
is.
often overlooked by many, many people. And, if Section 132 is to be believed, what does it say? All covenants, all contracts, all bonds, all associations, all expectations, and on and on. All these things that are made, entered into, and sealed by the Holy Spirit of promise do not have an end when men are dead, including a covenant of brotherhood. We could
Right.
sit in council with brethren on the other side, and we can, talk about this. This is what we're really talking about, is truly, truly having a priesthood of our that's a brotherhood, which gives the priesthood power, by the way,
Yes.
truly to be in compliance with eternal law. So here you have the covenant of brotherhood. Now there's some teeth in here, that you walk in all the commandments, and that you'll be a friend and a brother. You may enter into a covenant, this covenant or one like it, throughout your lifetime. Now, what if one of your brethren that you've entered into a covenant, what if he walks away? Or what if he does something that's not in compliance? How do we learn? How do we learn how to apply this thing fully? Because Christ came and died for our sins, but he also died for our grace. And he
Right.
knows we've got to take these steps up a ladder, and we're not going to be good at them in the beginning. And none of us are going to be perfect in the very beginning. We don't just enter into this covenant and all of a sudden you're a perfect brother,
Right.
right? So how do you apply this? We can all learn to be good to our neighbors, but now it's serious. Does the scriptures say anything about how to help? I actually have some really interesting, D&C 42, Matthew chapter 18, those when they talk about if your brother trespasses against you, take him between he and thee alone and try to work out the problem. And if you can't, bring in a mediator, an elder, a bishop, or somebody. Try to work through the problem, because the end goal is not to just prove that you're right. It's actually to fulfill a covenant,
Right.
to help each other walk in the commandments of God, to receive each other in fellowship and friendship. And the sisters can do the same thing with their relationships, sister wives, or in the Relief Society, or mothers and granddaughters, you name it. They can do this too. So, lest they feel like they can get out scot free, and it's
Right.
just for the men. No, this is a big deal. This is a community that we're talking about. We one of our other podcasts, we talked about the United Order. If you don't have this at the core,
You'll
it's
never
going to
have it.
fail. It's going to
Yeah.
fail.
Yeah.
But you've got to be able to hold people accountable. Now, Section 121, it's famous, it gets quoted all the time, but
Hmm.
it really lays out a good principle. Sometimes the Lord reproves us with sharpness. And then he says, afterwards, showing forth a greater degree of kindness, lest he esteem thee to be thy enemy. It doesn't say the Lord. It says, that's sometimes what we do.
Right.
And it gives us this outline. Sometimes we have to hold people accountable. That is true. And there's going to be difficult conversations in that process. But my experience is this: when the person who has to hold you accountable, when you know beyond a shadow of a doubt that they care more about you than being right, you receive that correction and they show forth afterwards a greater degree of love, and you don't esteem them to be thy enemy. In fact, your hearts are knit together even more because you have something real that's based in the truth. And Not only that, but you were given an opportunity to become better. And they were given an opportunity to invest in you. You can invest in others in the same way. We ought to not stand up in front of our people if we're ministers and just, flay them open all the time. Bless them first. And then when correction is needed, do it this way. We do this with our kids, with our wives, with our brethren, whoever we have interactions with that we're responsible for, especially. And I really, I know that this section 88, verse 133 is in relation to the school of the prophets. And what an idea. What an idea to have a school of prophets bound together in
Yep.
love, in the commandments together, doing the will of God, learning from each other. That kind of a true force would be unstoppable.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think a big part of that covenant too, and it's something that I've not where I'm at currently, but I've witnessed it in other places. I've witnessed it in the church and in various circumstances at work. There will be something that's said or a rumor that gets started, and we are so quick to just believe that, right? And not take the scriptural injunction that's given in 133. I mean, 88, 133, or the ones from the New Testament about going to your brother and talking those things out, right? Just saying, look, man, I heard this. Is this true? And then if it's true, get the backstory too, right? So often I think we look at things, and this took me years to figure out, right? And again, woefully so, shamefully so. I believe that about 99% of people never start out wanting to mess up or wanting to do wrong, right? I don't think that's anybody's intent most of the time. Now, certainly you can put yourself in some really horrible situations that is more conducive to making mistakes, and you should avoid those where you can. But I don't think anybody ever starts out with wanting to do evil. I think it's something that happens as you continue to make some bad decisions.
Right?
But I think we have to be very careful. I would never want to be judged on my worst day, right? And I try not to judge somebody else on their worst day ever. Sometimes that worst day is like really, really bad and there's no way around it, right? But
Right.
I think for the vast majority of transgressions and sins that we find, I think there can be way more grace applied. And certainly when we start talking on the level of the gospel and in our various churches and groups, and we have disagreements, I, I I'm often drawn back to something Joseph said about Zion, and I'm going to butcher this quote. I don't have it in front of me. But Joseph says, "Why do we not have Zion? Because we can't stay together long enough to get it.
Mhm.
We just go at each other over minutia. Meanwhile, we're missing the boat.
Yeah.
We were on the docks fist fighting about who gets the window seat. Meanwhile, the boat's taken off, and we
Right.
both
Yeah. That you bring up a good principle because, people do, we hear things about each other and we believe them, which destroys the very fabric of this covenant and brotherhood. It gossip and all of the, I don't know how else to say it other than horrors that accompany it. Just
right.
talk about people and and just make their lives miserable without them even being able to defend themselves. And there's a story that in the history of the church, and it's very applicable. But there was a problem between the first presidency and the Quorum of the 12. There's been several of them, but there was one in particular, and it was a real doozy, and they really got out of sorts with each other. But Joseph Smith gathered them up, and they I've got the story in front of me. It's quite long, so I don't want to read the whole thing, but But he gathered them up and he apologized. He believed some things about them that others had told him that were not true, and their feelings were hurt because of it. And they didn't act correctly either. And so there was a problem between the two quorums. But Joseph says something, and I think this can be taken as a principle for how to behave in a brotherhood. Joseph tells him this. He says, he makes a covenant with the quorum of the 12 at this point. He says, I will now covenant with you before God that I will not listen to nor credit any derogatory report against any of you, nor condemn you upon any testimony beneath the heavens, short of that testimony which is infallible, until I could see you face to face and know of a surety. And I do place unremitted confidence in your word, for I believe you to be men of truth. And ask the same of you, when I tell you anything, that you place equal confidence in my word, for I will not tell you I know anything that I do not know. And he just lays it out for them, saying, I'm not going to believe gossip anymore about you. And I believe, after our conversation, because they reconciled, that I believe you to be interested in the truth. And I believe that you want what's right. And this is one of the ways that you can soothe feelings and emotions, by admitting fault when there's problems in our councils. You know, there are people all over who have circles of influence, and call it a quorum or a council or a brotherhood. They exist in probably all the groups. How do we navigate some of those complexities? Because stuffing it all inside and pretending everything's okay, it doesn't work well in your marriage. It won't work well there. But having these conversations and really working through them. And if you need to make a promise to each other, we've been through this now. I promise I will do better. I will listen. I will try to not get angry and actually do those things. You would see men and women who could bless the whole entire earth, because you can't do that with the brethren that are around you, the ones that you have close associations with, and have that not spill over into your acquaintances at work, your acquaintances in the church, and in the community as a whole. That, because you start changing inside of you and you become a light unto all that you come in contact with. This is the purpose.
Absolutely.
If anything, we should be applying these principles because we want to be God's people.
Yes.
And this is just good. This is just good.
100%. And you were talking about how do we navigate that? And I look at my own self for correction on this. It took me years to apply this and figure this out, and I'm still not perfect at it. But something happens to people, and I haven't figured out why. I don't understand the mechanisms, but oftentimes when someone says something that we disagree with, we will attach motive to that. We will say, "Oh, I know why he's doing this, right? He's got all these ill intents, right?" Stop that. Stop that.
Right.
Sometimes they have that idea, even if you think it's a bad idea, they have it because probably their life experience, right? And so those early life experiences largely make up the filter through which we view everything.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I've noticed is, and in these times when I've caught myself, which again isn't as often as it should be, as I've caught myself, I've had to ask myself a question. Okay, why do I feel this way all of a sudden? Right? Why do I want to assign an intent there? Maybe there's no intent there other than that's just the way he sees it. And if that's just the way he sees it, and he's not doing damage to the group, and he's not doing damage to ordinances or any of those other things, I don't care what someone else believes. And Joseph didn't really care what someone else believes. And let's remember, both Brigham and Joseph talked about there would be other faiths in Zion during the millennium,
Right.
right? I think he mentions Presbyterians and Methodists in particular, right?
Hmm.
So I don't know how all that works, Dave. I don't know how that all gets figured out, but I trust the Lord to do that because I can't look at somebody else's heart. I wish I
Yeah.
could, right? I think we might get into that place once in a while where we can we have our vision expanded and our perspective shifts. But more times than not, we don't know what was in that other person's heart. We don't know what made it up. And oftentimes what I've discovered is that when someone says something, puts forth a bad idea with which I disagree with, and it does kind of start those feelings to well up there of getting riled up a little bit. I'm like, okay, maybe I'm insecure in what I believe, and maybe that's what this is, right? And those look, I'll be the first guy to tell you that stinks on ice having to ask that question, right? And but it's healthy, right? And some ideas I've let go because I'm like, maybe I'm not as firm on this as what I thought I was, and maybe I need to do some more investigation there. And sometimes I've walked away even more convinced, and other times I've been like, yeah, it was probably a crappy idea on my part, and I just need to accept this correction and say I don't know, or heaven
Yeah.
forbid, maybe even I was wrong.
Right. Well, you just something I've learned in relationships. You will always get farther if you can approach a problem from the very beginning, having a view of yourself saying you might be wrong. Even if you're probably not, even if you're really, really sure, when you go to have these conversations, they're difficult with your brother, with your wife, with your children, whoever. Approach it carefully and learn to listen. This has been the hardest lesson for me, especially because, as anyone can attest by our conversations, man, I must love the sound of my own voice. Listening is really, really hard for me because it gets awkward. I just want to talk. I just want to talk and fill up the silence. But learning to listen to another person and say, help me understand your perspective, because that immediately starts to take out this temptation to assign a motive, because that's what we want to do. We really want to assign a motive so that we can prove that they're wrong. And not only are they are wrong because they have a bad motive and they want to destroy me or whatever. There's all kinds of motives. But if we stop and pause and say, I want to just hear you out, that will bring about a certain kind of spirit in your conversation where the other person will then want to hear you out. And if they don't, it's their loss. But now you understand them, you have invested in them. And even if you walk away and say, thank you for expressing yourself, now you can think about it. And when, I got called out a little bit ago, a couple of weeks ago, and it was really an interesting experience because somebody, it was kind of on a basic point of the gospel, but somebody says, hey, I notice you're not very good at this thing, and immediately I wanted to justify myself and I wanted to say, well, you just think that because you want to be better than me and everything. And I had to stop. I had to stop. It was a conversation over texting. I just stopped and I said, I'll get back with you tomorrow. I got to process this. I know right now, if I let my emotions start doing the talking, I'm going to cause a lot of damage. I didn't say that to him, but I knew. And I stopped, just got myself busy, prayed about it, thought about it through the night, came back the next day and said, you know what? There's something to what you're saying. Maybe you don't see the whole picture. Maybe you don't understand where I'm coming from all the way, but you make a good point. Could I do better? Yeah, I could do better. And I probably need to do better because who of us is perfect in everything we do? And I have appreciated the, I'm going to read something from Brigham because I've appreciated when people's done this to me. Brigham Young says, Journals Discourses 9, page 124. If a man is out of the way, it's the duty of his brethren to tell him of it in a kind and friendly spirit. When someone has done that for me in a kind and friendly spirit, man, the power it has over my mind. And I go, I want to do better now. I do, because they're not attacking me. They're not throwing me under the bus. But I'll take correction however it comes. But correction done in that way has had more of a positive effect at times than even flattering words, where people praise your good virtues. And they say, hey, I noticed you did this and it wasn't good and it wasn't useful. And you can feel all down and depressed for a minute. You could even stay there, I guess, if you want to, but it's not advised. This is what repentance is for. Do better, take a step forward, and watch your whole world change.
Absolutely. I I think we live in such a world now that, and it's unfortunate it took the events that we've witnessed as of late for me to really realize it. But we've got to let that light shine, right? Um, especially amongst our own. Certainly to the world. I think I think the price of discipleship is is to be present. We're not sent out into the world to simply hunker down and wait for the end, right?
Right.
I think the Savior expects us to be change agents
Yeah.
and to be those agents of change for the better. We have to be willing to engage and engage, quite frankly, with an open heart. And that's spooky, right? Because if you approach someone with an open heart, you're vulnerable, you're exposed,
Yeah.
and you risk getting hurt. I won't sugarcoat it. You risk getting hurt.
Right.
But would any of us ever say, I don't want to marry a spouse because I'm afraid of the end? Gosh, I don't know what's going to happen. I could lose my spouse in a horrible car accident. Then what do I do? I mean, if we lived in such a state as that, we miss out on so much. And to go along with that, I think sometimes, and this is really guilty amongst the brethren, myself perhaps more than anybody else. When a loved one has a problem, or anybody that I feel a vested interest in, my first my first thing is, okay, how do I fix this? I got to fix this. I got to help them fix it, right? And what's interesting is that nowhere in the scripture where Alma's getting ready to baptize and he's putting people under covenant, does he say, you know, and you'll mourn with them and then you're going to help them fix their problems? No, he says you're just going to mourn with those that mourn, right?
Yep.
And sometimes that's just to be there with them. And
Yeah.
I can't help escaping that thought that there's something powerful in mourning with somebody else, not trying to fix it, not trying to make it better right then. Sometimes you just got to go through the fire with them. And for guys, that's tough because we want to fix it all, right?
Right.
Give me some duct tape and a hammer, I'll put it back together.
Right.
Um, but that doesn't always work.
No, it doesn't. And what you're talking about when you mourn with people is you learn to suffer with them. And it is so against our nature, especially as men, like you say. It is. It's probably the number one complaints that most wives have against their husbands. I just want you to listen to me and be empathetic, but all you try to do is tell me how to fix my problem. And it seems so obvious to us. It's not about the nail, that famous thing on, the lady has the nail in her head. And I just have this pounding headaches. And she's trying to explain it. And he's like, well, yeah, you got a nail in your head. I mean, we could just pull it out. It would be all better. But this difference between men and women. But we see this even amongst men and men. if we would learn to suffer with each other, truly. And that means helping when needed to be helped. And sometimes there's no helping that can be done. When you've had one of your dear friends lose a child, there's no helping that. There's no magic words you can say that make it all better. You can say, I'm going to sit here with you so you're not alone.
Yeah.
I know it probably doesn't seem like it helps much, but it helps. It helps a
Yep.
lot. People's prayers help a lot. And if we're going to be the kind of people to deal out solutions, we need to be the kind of people that are willing to receive others' help too. People need to suffer with us and we need to suffer with them. And this is, I mean, I know we're going all over, but this all connected theme really boils down to this. Christ suffered for us. Are we willing to do the same for others?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think if we want Zion, I think we have to do this. I think we have to gain this brotherhood. I don't think there's any way around it.
No,
And I think it's going to require us to redefine what the Lord really means. Or let me rephrase this. I think it's going to take us figuring out what the Lord really means by Zion being a people of one heart and one mind. Forever, I thought that meant, oh, we'll just agree on everything. That's what that will be. But the older I get, the more I'm like, I don't think that's what he's talking about. I
no,
think I think there's going to be differences of opinion all the way through this. And that's good.
yeah.
That is good. Um, one last story I want to relate from Philadelphia here is the men that went in to hammer out what would become the Constitution of the United States. Jefferson wasn't part of that. Jefferson was over in France still as an ambassador.
Mm,
But when Madison writes to him and says what's happening, Jefferson was quoted as saying, "You've assembled a group of demigods," right? Meaning these were men who were very intelligent, very passionate. Many of them had bled for their country already. And there's a great book called Miracle in Philadelphia, which chronicles the this process. And there were vehement disagreements about all sorts of things, ranging from taxation to slavery. How strong is the executive branch going to be? Should we have an
mm,
executive branch? One guy suggested we should have a king with term limits, right? I mean, like it was all over the place, right? And several times Franklin calls for them just to take a break and get on their knees and pray
mm,
because he recognized it was going off the rails. But what was the result of all that disagreement? Well, they first hung together, right? There was no real imperative that they hang together as tight as they did because they were no longer fighting off the British, right?
mm.
The actual life and death stuff had kind of passed. But they stuck together. And what I find interesting is that and the author makes the point, and I think she's correct, that we would not have had a durable constitution as what we've had without some of that friction. That it's
I
out
agree.
of the sorting through those ideas and all of that, but yet staying together that produces what has been the most durable form of government, representative government that the world has ever seen.
Yeah.
But that doesn't come without a cost. And so I look at those men and I say, well, were they united? I think they were. I don't think it fit my version of unity that I had an understanding of earlier on. But I think there definitely was a brotherhood there. And somehow they managed to get it done. Likewise, we can see in the Restoration, there were tremendous disagreements.
Mm.
But before Joseph dies, people go, they come back, they go again, right? I mean, there's all of this, but there was a core group. There was a core group of guys who just took what would become D&C 88-133 and they lived it.
Yeah.
And as I look at this idea of gaining that brotherhood that is so vital, that quite frankly can be a remedy to so much of what divides Mormonism and quite frankly the country on the macro level. That's the bomb I think that can heal some of this, right? Is that man a brother?
Yeah.
He is.
Right.
He is. And because he's a brother, I am no better than he is. I disagree with him and I'm not going to back down, but I'm not going to just cast him aside. And I think I think, you know, take it with a huge grain of salt. I think that's how we get there, Dave.
Well, and we start that process in the circles of influence that we have, wherever they are. Because if we're of the same spirit, we'll begin to grow together. And if we want to have something that's truly lasting, you mentioned the government, and as long as it's lasted, we're talking about an eternal covenant.
Right.
You better believe there's going to be some obstacles to overcome. There's going to be some things that we get to chip off of ourselves and help bless each other. But never giving up, doing our best. We can go through our histories, we can see splinters, we can see people, and I don't fault any of those brethren because I understand it's difficult and I may have done the same thing. But can I learn from those mistakes and can I do better? There's the truth, like we said in the very beginning. There's the truth, and we can stand on true principle. But we ought to be able to treat each other with brotherhood. And you want to convince the human mind? Treat them that way. You want to help someone see a different perspective? Don't just divide over the first thing that happens. The scriptures tell us, can the hand say to the eye, I have no need of thee? The Savior brings up that parable. Who's to say who we need and who we don't? But the eye and the hand and the foot and all these parts of the body are probably going to be used for very different things. And I think it's D&C section 46 says that to some is given one gift and to some is given another, that the whole may be profited. How much are we missing because we haven't been able to reconcile our differences? Some things I realize are big deal to people, and I don't want to negate that. But then at the same time, I go, do we have a responsibility to try to work through it? Do we have a responsibility to try to do better? I'm not going to tell people what to do. All I know is that I can create friendships and we can learn to disagree. What's that famous statement that Joseph made? Don't fault someone for erring in doctrine. It's no sin.
Right.
And yet we can still associate with them and even have them in the church, because it's not a sin to err in doctrine, but it is a sin to treat people poorly. And if we want to be God's people, we got to be like him. He has people. I mean, it baffles my mind. I don't have the answer for it, but how can the Lord sit by and choose people to come into his kingdom that aren't living the truth? He has the accurate judgment to judge it all by, but there are all kinds of people, and we may be asked to bless and serve and help. And if we take these principles we talked about today and truly apply them, we could become the men of the West, right? I know that West is whatever it is, but that famous prophecy, whether it's true or not, that the men of the West would come down from the mountains, save the Constitution and save the people because of their belief in God and because of their characters because they stand on the principles of truth, not divide over a comma, as it
Right.
were.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, and you hit
So
on it, right? I think I think the adversary's been very clever to this
very
point on keeping us divided, right? And this isn't a call for everyone to get united on Sundays.
right.
That's not what David or myself are talking about.
That's right.
Um, but if he keeps us fighting amongst ourselves and we can't unite on anything, I think it's a important question to be asked. What is it that the adversary finds so threatening about men being united together? That has been his operation for a long, long, long time. Just keeping them fighting amongst themselves. Because I think if we could get to that point, if we could be a DNC 88 133 kind of people, ooh, I think the
Yeah.
foundations of hell would shake. I
Yeah.
do. I think nothing would be held back, and I think we could pierce the veil, and we could do all sorts of things that we read about in the Old Testament and the New Testament in those early days of the restoration. I think it just takes us getting our hearts right and then knitting them together to form that nucleus that can do the job. I think brotherhood is so important in this.
Yeah.
And I, like you, feel that maybe we haven't paid enough attention to that. And certainly, I want to say this. I have made some mistakes, some very public mistakes on this podcast. I worry that I have sown too much division at times, and it's something that I'm seeking to correct quickly. And I'll never back down from the truth. And if I see gross error, I'll still call that out.
Yep.
But certainly I can do it better. And certainly I can do it in a more judicious way that seeks to build rather than tear down. And so that's something in my own life that I know needs correcting quickly.
Oh, one more analogy. And just before I do, just to your point, there a good friend of mine brought out some interesting ideas. There's a difference between calling people out and calling people up. And I
That's great.
think I think we could focus on the latter and remember we why we're trying to straighten people out, not just to prove we're right, but to get to the truth. But I want to liken ourselves in this analogy to remember the Lord says that he uses the vineyard quite a bit in the scriptures. And when you look at even just our people, we really are a vineyard. And the Lord he's trying to work with us, he's trying to help us. But you have this people over in this corner, and well, they're producing certain kinds of fruit, and it's good to the taste. Some of it's good, some of it's not so good. And we're over here, and some of our fruit's good, some of it's not so good, and other people scattered around. The Lord is tending to his vineyard because he knows the value. But what's going to happen in that day when he decides, okay, I've done enough. I've strengthened the vines. I've strengthened the roots and the trees. So now I can take and make cuttings of these different trees or different vines and graft them together. That's really what the devil doesn't want, is a
Right.
tree that can produce enough fruit to bless the whole earth. I'm not in a position, nor do I have the authority to say that anybody else isn't exactly where the Lord wants them for now.
Right.
I couldn't say. But if there's fruits in your life, get close to your Father in heaven, do the work he asks you to do, learn the principles contained in the scriptures, all these things, the things you go over, the things everybody goes over every Sunday. Take those principles and the commandments of God, apply them into your life, treat people like brethren, and we will start to see changes within ourselves. And the Lord may just say, it is time. And he may begin to graft, even if it's just those who will, begin to graft people together so that he could do his great plan. Because he said he'll do everything he can for his children. And that's his glory, right? To bring to pass the immortality and eternal lives of his children. But at the end, there's really a great battle that's going on. And it's said that he will win. And if we're not the people to do it, hopefully there's another people that will. But we have a chance today. So let's do our best.
Yep. Good stuff.
So,
Dave, I really do appreciate all of our conversations that we have. I really do. Is there anything else you wanted to go over before we wrap this up?
I think we've done it. I have no idea how long we've been going, but I know that we've gone through it all. So
about 2 hours, not bad.
Okay.
So, dude, I appreciate you. I love you. I appreciate everything you bring to the table. I really do. You're a good man, and I'm just happy to associate with you whenever and wherever I can. If there was one bummer moment from my trip in Philly, it's that when you called me and said, "Hey, I'm in Missouri." I'm like, oh. So,
Yeah.
but you'll be coming out soon enough again. We'll have to get together.
Yep, I'll be coming out in a couple weeks. So
awesome.
Okay.
All right, Dave. Thank you. Hang around for 5 minutes. Bye, everybody.
Yep.